All right, for more, let's speak now with Kamran Bokhari. He's a strategic forecaster and a senior resident fellow at the Middle East Policy Council. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Bokhari. So there seems to be multiple versions of this MOU, whether it's sanctions relief, the Strait of Hormuz, or the question of Lebanon. What's your reading of these competing narratives? Could this be an early sign that the deal may be more fragile than it appears?
Well, it is fragile, Julie. Look, we just have, a memorandum of understanding that, according to the vice president, is about a page and a half long. And so, what that tells us is that there's a lot more to be discussed. Hence, the 60-day period after the deal goes into effect. So we need to see what comes out of that. That page and a half has to be fleshed out. That means there's a lot of things that are being interpreted by different sides for their own reasons. Each side in this, I'm talking about the United States and Iran, they have domestic constituencies to cater to. And there's a lot of criticism of President Donald Trump from within the United States. There is a lot of criticism from the far right of the Iranian regime, and they need to manage that. So what they do is, at least this is what the Iranians are doing, and they're known for their information operations, that they, basically telegraph interpretations of the deal that suit their interest in order to placate their own hawks. Now that has an effect on the discourse within the United States. In other words, it's sort of a mutually reinforcing problem for both governments. Now, add in the fact that the United States and Israel are not seeing eye to eye on this. There's a divergence of interest between the two allies. And so this is a really, really complicated triangular dynamic that can go south.
Absolutely. So, what would success actually look like at the end of this, next negotiating phase for both Washington and for Tehran? And what are the odds of them reaching that deal after that 60-day window?
Oh, that 60 days is like an eternity right now, if you ask me. It's just, there's just so much that needs to be discussed. There's just so many aspects of this memorandum of understanding in terms of, what kind of financial relief are the Iranians going to get? What are they going to do with their enrichment capability? To what extent are they going to provide access to their facilities? What about the already highly enriched uranium stockpile? Will that be diluted in country? Will that be transferred out of the country? What will an Iranian nuclear program look like? What does Iran's behavior look like when it comes to proxies like Hezbollah and others? And then there's the thorny question of Iran's ballistic missile capability. So there's a lot that has to fit together in order for it to be successful. So I wish I had a benchmark, but I don't at this stage. It's just too early.
And Dr. Bokhari, now that the fighting has eased, diplomacy has resumed as well. Tell us about what Tehran is doing in terms of framing this narrative. Could it be the outcome as proof that resistance worked, that their regime survived military pressure and then forced Washington back to the table?
Of course. I mean, look, the Iranians have known from the very beginning that this is they need to compromise in the end. When everything is said and done, whenever that is, the Iranians will have to compromise in a very significant way. Now, I think that most of their factions are in agreement that there needs to be a compromise. The issue is that they don't want to compromise and then look like they've capitulated. So they have to, focus on their information operations. They have to manage their own base. They have to manage their perceptions in the region. And of course, they need leverage with the United States. So they have to come up with an interpretation that, hey, look, the regime survived. So that's how we won. We have forced the U.S. hand with regards to the flow of oil and gas through the Strait of Hormuz. So they will highlight all of that. And obviously, there's a lot of hyperbole in that, to say the least, if not, outright, if you will, false statements. So that is the nature of what they're dealing with. They're expected to do that. The problem is when the international media and the global intelligentsia stops being critical of these information operations, and they just consume them and refer to these public statements as if though this is what the reality is. And then you can see second and third order, back and forth conversations where people are accusing, Washington of having, conceded too much ground, and it goes on and on. So it creates a global echo chamber that sort of is neither here nor there.
And there's also this issue of Israel and compliance. The Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, he's under pressure at home over this interim deal with elections looming. What political incentive does he have to keep showing military strength, whether in Lebanon, Syria, or elsewhere, even if Washington wants this agreement to hold?
So look, he's caught between two different and very difficult situations. On one hand, his opponents are looking at the outcome of this conflict in the form of this memorandum of understanding and the deal in the making, and saying this is a complete failure, and they're blaming the prime minister for that. So that's one challenge that he has to deal with. On the other hand, if he wants to deal with this challenge and look tough, then he runs the risk of creating greater dissonance with Washington. And that, again, will not sit well within Israel because, you could be from any political faction in Israel. One of the things that everybody agrees on, that the relationship of Israel with the United States is absolutely essential, and nobody wants to see anything happen to that. So this is a really tough spot for Netanyahu right now, and I would say, we don't know what will happen in the coming elections that, at this point, are slated for October, though there's some talk of early election as well. But even if another government comes in, another coalition government comes in, headed by some opponent of Netanyahu, they'll face the same problem, because this is something. This is a significant moment in U.S.-Israeli relations where there's a divergence of interests, especially when it comes to Iran.
All right. Thanks so much for weighing in. We were speaking with Dr. Kamran Bokhari, strategic forecaster and a senior resident fellow with the Middle East Policy Council.